In order to understand why I was so attracted to self-help books, you have to understand what my childhood was like. I remember spending summers with my grandma, and she would sometimes trip on something because she wasn't paying attention, and out of nowhere she would start cursing the president and the prime minister and the rest of the government for about the next hour or so. The funny thing is, I'm not even exaggerating. I grew up in an environment where everything was always somebody else's fault. You spent all your days complaining about how somebody gave you something, but it wasn't enough. And my financial education consisted of walking around markets for hours and hours so we could save a few cents here and there. If you grow up in an environment like this, where you're set up to fail, any sort of appeal to personal responsibility will either deeply piss you off or will be the most liberating breath of fresh air. For me, it was the latter. Even with the tiniest amount of self-awareness, I could see that the overwhelming reason why I was not doing as well as I wanted to was not because of someone else, but because of myself. I mean, look, are there problems in politics and everywhere else? Absolutely. But when I looked at myself and I saw that I had wasted hours and hours the day before, and I wasn't doing so well the day after, the major problem was me and not what the prime minister had said or done. I don't even say wasted time judgmentally, it'd be totally fine without the complaining, but what I don't think is fine is watching shows for hours and hours the night before, and when you wake up the next day being so self-unaware that you think that the reason you're not doing well financially, for example, is primarily somebody else's fault. Let's just say if my grandma had spent half the time complaining about politics and watching it on television and practicing and developing a skill, she might have been twice as happy and prosperous. See if you identify with that, maybe not to such extreme, but still. The self-improvement genre will either make you very mad or appeal to you in almost an addicting way. The following is definitely not about not reading books or even the self-help genre. I think my beginner's list is pretty decent, and there are also many other good books to be read. But it is about the emergence of this new stereotypical human that I keep seeing a lot of. A person who has turned into, in some ways, a professional self-help book reader. In my case, I think it was a little more understandable because I had essentially created a platform around summarizing these books, so it was sort of my job at that point. But the more I read it, the more I started getting nauseous of reading the same unsophisticated arguments page after page. So here are some reasons why self-help books are problematic, in my opinion. Most self-help books are written in one of the following two ways. You either make a claim and you follow it up with science, or you make a claim and you go look for examples to confirm your claim. Now, out of those two, you might think that the first one is better, but it's actually worse, in my opinion. Whenever a self-help book uses science, it's usually something like social science, which calling that science is a stretch. This deserves its own video, and we won't be spending much time here, but most of these studies are of course as scientific as looking at the NBA and observing a correlation between the melanin in the skin and success in basketball, and concluding that the melanin in the skin is the causal factor for great basketball players, and not an extremely complicated combination of endless other, more important variables like height and athleticism and so on. At the end, you're recommended to inject melanin into your skin as a 5'2" unathletic person to be a great basketball player. Yeah, that's fortunately not how science works. So I actually prefer the second, confirmation bias approach to writing self-help books, because at least it doesn't pretend to be science or fact, but opinion. You come up with an opinion, and you go look for examples to back it up. The problem with this approach is that even an opinion like playing the lottery is great can be backed up with thousands of examples. Now, I don't quite take the extreme view on this like some people do, that you can never listen to anyone that's ever slightly more successful than you because it's always survivorship bias. In fact, these are the two common extreme and toxic views in my opinion, that nothing is ever possible, or anything is always possible. But when you start telling people what they should do based on people like Jeff Bezos and LeBron James, while it's still always better than spending hours every day thinking and complaining about what the president is doing, it can also ruin people's lives. If you happen to be average athletically, there isn't much advice from LeBron that applies to you. The exact same logic is true of Jeff Bezos and the average person, but it's funny that people have more of a problem with these not-so-obvious traits that you can't observe, like physical height. It blows my mind how many people think variation magically stops at physical traits. So put in a more simple way, the first reason these books are somewhat problematic is because they're full of bullshit. Now, you don't disregard something in a juvenile fashion just because it's bullshit. You ask a more important question of, it is bullshit, but what would happen to a person who acted like it were true? They would at least start doing something and be more pleasant to be around and so on, unlike my grandma. So in that way, it's much better. The problem that I have isn't necessarily that these books are full of bullshit, but that they lack nuance. So when a 5'2" person gets motivated by LeBron and starts playing basketball a lot, he's already done way better with his physical and mental health, for example, than the version of himself that complains about being short and other people being tall 24/7. But now he's dedicating his energy to a path in life that he isn't as optimized for as maybe his much better talent of painting, because he bought into the sort of everything is possible, believe in yourself mentality. The same thing is true of a 5'2" business ability or some other mental ability people, for example, when they're doing something that they are wasting their time on and should really be picking another path. Again, still much better than the do nothing and complain always approach, but not quite as nuanced as somebody sitting down with you and realistically analyzing your ability while keeping in mind your goals in life, and so on. The second reason is how boring reading these things is. The funny thing is, this is also, in my opinion, by far their biggest advantage. In a world where people have an anxiety attack because they just sat down on the toilet and realized that they forgot their phone, if you can read 300 pages of being told the exact same thing on every page in a slightly altered way over and over again, you will be God among men. Seriously, that's like having superpowers in a world like this. But if you want to benefit from this, I think there are much better ways of doing it. So many people who are physically unhealthy sitting there on their weekend reading the 94th page of why you should start doing things. Take that time and go for a walk for an hour or two. You'll get the benefits of doing things that downregulate your stimulation and also benefit yourself much more. The third reason is how ineffective these books are at communicating with you. It again stems from the book needing to be 300 pages and the author wanting to say that you should take some personal responsibility. Most of these things should be short essays at best, but they follow Parkinson's law, which states that work expands as to fill the time available for its completion. I remember I was talking to someone about a topic and he said, recommend me a book on this topic. I said there was a good page and a half all about it on Wikipedia. And you could see so much resistance, like it had to be a 300-page book, otherwise how would he feel good about it? This leads to the fourth problem, that books today are so overrated and they're not written to help you. See, when you look at something like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, you have a book that people preserved for centuries through all kinds of adversity because that's how much they had enjoyed and valued the work. Today, 9 out of 10 books are written by some guy who built a little Instagram following and now feels like he needs to write a book. I remember being approached about writing a book and sitting there and thinking, I've never wanted to share anything that would require something more than a short essay or animation. There's no reason why I should write a book. Now, to be fair, it was probably how lazy I was about just the thought of writing that many pages more than my impeccable integrity. But I remember thinking how much I was giving up by that decision. Ever watch a guy come up on stage and they're introduced as entrepreneur and the best-selling author and everyone's like, yeah! Well, here's the thing. The entrepreneur part, you just called yourself that, and the best-selling author part is literally why these people write these books. The next time you buy 9 out of 10 of these books, it's so that some guy can get up on stage and jerk off to himself about being an author, reach a few more people while doing it, and make a little money as a bonus. They write books just like they create Instagram accounts, but this time while buying the book, you're essentially following their Instagram account and it costs $15. There are better ways to spend your money, but more importantly, your time. The fifth and final problem we'll discuss for now is this emergence of the all-new professional self-help reader. I was very happy about being influenced to read a lot, and then influencing tons of other people to read a lot as well. It was this cool movement on YouTube where all these people that you looked up to made videos telling you to read instead of do drugs or some other terrible path that a lot of young kids get exposed to. And I still look back at that with a lot of positive feelings and nostalgia. But here's the advantage of drugs over these self-improvement books. I know, hear me out. I've never met a person that was addicted to hardcore drugs and was messing up their life as a result, while still thinking that the drugs were a great thing. But with self-help, no matter how much some of these people are paralyzed from reading too much or wasting their time where they could be doing much more enjoyable and much more productive things, it seems to be this thing that they're doing that's obviously positive. Again, nothing wrong with reading these things per se. I have a list of recommendations myself, but here's where some self-awareness needs to come in, and you need to ask yourself if this is the best way to spend your time. And I see so many of these stereotypes where it is obvious that they would be much better served with a list of endless other activities. With that in mind, here is a short recommendation on what you could do instead. If you're in the beginning stages of recovering from your constant victimhood indoctrination like I was, definitely read a few books. I have a list, other people also have great recommendations. But once you get that out of your system, make sure you don't become some self-help junkie. Always pick practicing your craft over reading about it, always. If you need to consume information about it, stop glorifying the book as a medium. Realize that there was a time where that glorification was deserved. Not anymore. All you have to do is have a few followers on social media, and now you're an author. You can consume the information in a much more enjoyable or concise form with things like Wikipedia and so many great podcasts and videos and people sharing their experience online. If you're doing it to fill in the time after you've practiced your craft, realize that there could be much better ways of doing that as well. There are so many different interesting hobbies you could take up and so many great relationships you could build. This is just a short list of things you could do. There's no reason you should be waking up on a Saturday and reading yet another book lacking nuance that was written to promote some guy and stroke his ego, telling you something that you've heard a million times in the most repetitive way possible, page after page, for 300 pages. Be compassionate to yourself. There are much more beautiful things in life to be experienced than that.